Chuck E. Cheese sign loomed over the desolate stretch of Interstate 80 in Wyoming. A beacon of faded plastic and peeling paint against the endless sagebrush-dotted plains. I needed a job. Any job. And the eternally blinking now hiring sign felt like a lifeline, even if it was attached to a place that smelled perpetually of stale pizza and children's tears. I'd seen better days, driving cross-country with nothing but a beat-up Honda Civic and the dwindling hope of finding something, anything, in California. I walked in, the cacophony of arcade game noises and screaming kids hitting me like a wall. A manager, a guy named Dale with a name tag that read, "Party Captain," and a weary look that suggested he'd captained one too many parties, interviewed me in a back office that reeked of disinfectant and desperation. "You ever worked with kids before?" Dale asked, not really looking at me, more at the stack of greasy pizza boxes piled in the corner. "Sure," I lied, figuring babysitting my niece counted. "I love kids." "Right. Well, this ain't babysitting. This is different." He finally met my gaze, his eyes strangely intense. "We need someone for the overnight shift. Cleaning, restocking, basic security. You good with that?" I nodded, suppressing the urge to ask why a Chuck E. Cheese needed overnight security in the middle of nowhere. Wyoming. The pay was surprisingly decent, probably because no one in their right mind wanted this shift. "Good. We have some specific procedures. Nothing major, just rules. Gotta follow them. To the letter." He handed me a thick packet, stapled together and stained with what I hoped was tomato sauce. "Read this. Memorize it. Your life might depend on it." That last part, delivered with a completely straight face, should have been my cue to run. But the desperation gnawed at me, and the allure of a paycheck, any paycheck, was too strong. I took the packet, the weight of it surprisingly heavy in my hands. "One more thing," Dale added, a strange glint in his eye. "Never ever let the animatronics out of your sight when they're powered on. Understand?" I nodded again, a chill crawling up my spine. This was going to be a long night. The initial wave of kids was starting to subside, making way for more exhausted-looking parents trying to scrape their sugared-up kids from the ticket redemption counter and arcade machines. Back in my car, parked under the flickering neon glow of the Chuck E. Cheese sign, I flipped open the packet. The first few pages were standard employee handbook stuff: dress code, purple polo shirt, khaki pants, the uniform of shame, break policy, one 15-minute break to be taken in the designated break zone, a single flickering fluorescent-lit room with a vending machine that looked like it hadn't been restocked since the Reagan administration, and emergency contacts, Dale's cell number scrawled in shaky handwriting. Then came the night shift protocol. The font changed, becoming sharper, more urgent. The paper felt different too, thicker, almost like parchment. Chuck E. Cheese's, Interstate 80, Wyoming, night shift procedures. Rule 1. Arrive precisely at 11 p.m. Use the key provided to unlock the employee entrance at the rear of the building. Immediately upon entering, perform a full sweep of the premises. Check all play areas, the arcade, the prize counter, the kitchen, and especially the stage area. Note any anomalies. Report them to Dale immediately before proceeding to Rule 2. Rule 2. At 11:30 p.m. begin the power down sequence. This must be done in a specific order. Arcade games, individual switches on each machine. Kitchen appliances, main breaker located in the pantry. Prize counter lights and displays. Main dining area lights. Leave one row of fluorescent lights on, the row closest to the stage. Do not, under any circumstances, power down the animatronics. They have their own schedule. Rule 3. At precisely 12 a.m., a music box located on the shelf behind the prize counter will begin to play. The tune is "Pop Goes the Weasel" Do not interfere with the music box. Let it play through its entire cycle. If the music stops prematurely, refer to Addendum A. Addendum A was a single blood-red sheet of paper with the words "Pray" scrawled across it in what looked disturbingly like dried blood. Rule 4. After the music box finishes, begin the cleaning cycle. Use the provided cleaning supplies located in the janitor's closet next to the break zone. Focus on the following areas in this order. Ball pit. Sanitize, count, and rearrange the balls. There should be exactly 500. Report any discrepancies. Arcade floor, sweep and mop, paying special attention to any sticky residue. If the residue is black, use the industrial strength cleaner and wear gloves. Dining area tables and chairs, wipe down, ensuring all crumbs and spills are removed. Stage area, dust and polish the animatronics. Do not make direct eye contact with Chucky, maintain a respectful distance. Rule 5. Throughout the night, you will hear noises. These noises are expected. Please carry on with your other tasks. I read and reread the rules, a growing sense of unease settling in my stomach. This wasn't just a cleaning job. It was some kind of bizarre ritual. The specificity of the instructions, the ominous warnings, the blood-red addendum. It was all incredibly unsettling. But I needed the money. I told myself it was just some weird corporate thing, a way to keep employees on their toes. I was wrong. I arrived at 10:55 p.m., giving myself ample time to get settled. The employee entrance was a grimy metal door tucked away behind the dumpster, overflowing with pizza boxes. The key slid in with a rusty click, and I stepped inside. The interior was even more unsettling in the dim light. The arcade machines, now silent and dark, looked like rows of sleeping metal beasts. The prize counter, with its garish plush toys and cheap plastic trinkets, seemed to leer at me. And the stage was the worst. Chucky and his band, Helen Henny, Mr. Munch, Jasper T. Jowls, and Pasquale P. Pieplate, stood frozen in their performance positions, their eyes wide and glassy, their smiles fixed in grotesque, unnatural grins. The single row of fluorescent lights cast long, dancing shadows, making them seem almost alive. I followed the instructions, performing the initial sweep. The ball pit was surprisingly clean, though I shuddered at the thought of counting all those germ-infested balls. The arcade was sticky, as expected, but thankfully, the residue was the usual soda and pizza variety. The dining area was a mess of crumbs and discarded napkins. Then I reached the stage. As I approached, I noticed something off. Mr. Munch, the purple monster who played the keyboard, was slightly out of position. His arm, usually raised in a triumphant gesture, was drooping, almost touching the keys. It was a subtle difference, but it was definitely there. My heart pounded in my chest. Anomaly. Report to Dale. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking. Dale's number was already programmed in. I hit dial and waited, the silence of the Chuck E. Cheese punctuated only by the rhythmic ticking of a giant, cartoonish clock on the wall. The phone rang and rang and rang. No answer. Just the endless, mocking ringtone. I tried again. Still nothing. Panic began to set in. The rules were clear. Report any anomalies before proceeding. But Dale wasn't answering. What was I supposed to do? I looked back at Mr. Munch. His arms seemed to have drooped even further. And his eyes, were they following me? It was just my imagination, just the shadows. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. I couldn't just stand here. I had to do something. I decided to proceed with the power down sequence, hoping that Dale would call back soon. Maybe it was just a minor glitch. Maybe Mr. Munch always drooped a little at night. Maybe I was just being paranoid. But deep down, I knew something was very, very wrong. I completed the power down sequence, the silence growing heavier with each click of a switch. The arcade machines went dark, their flashing lights extinguished. The kitchen hummed to a stop. The prize counter became a shadowy cavern of plush and plastic. Only the single row of fluorescent lights above the stage remained, casting their eerie glow on the animatronic band. I checked the time. 11:58 p.m. 2 minutes until the music box. I found it on the shelf behind the prize counter, a small, ornate wooden box with a tarnished brass crank. It looked old, antique even, like something you'd find in your grandmother's attic. I hesitated, a strange reluctance gripping me. The rules were so specific about this music box. Do not interfere. Let it play. The giant cartoon clock on the wall ticked down the seconds. 11:59, 12:00. Right on cue, the music box sprang to life. A delicate, tinkling melody filled the air. Pop goes the weasel. The tune was familiar, childish, yet in this context, it sounded utterly menacing. I stood there, frozen, listening to the music. It was hypnotic, almost mesmerizing. I felt a strange urge to dance, to sing along, to join in the macabre celebration. But I resisted. I had to stay focused. I had to follow the rules. The music continued, each note twisting my insides tighter. I glanced at the stage. Chucky and his band remained motionless, their glassy eyes staring blankly ahead. But I could have sworn I saw Mr. Munch's head twitch, just a fraction of an inch, as if he were listening to the music too. Then, halfway through the song, the music stopped. Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence that was somehow worse than the creepy tune. My blood ran cold. The music had stopped prematurely. Addendum. A. I scrambled for the packet, my hands trembling so badly I could barely hold it. I flipped to the blood-red sheet of paper. Pray. That was it. Just one word. Pray. Pray to whom? For what? I wasn't a religious person. I hadn't prayed in years. But in that moment, surrounded by the silent animatronics and the oppressive darkness, I felt a desperate need for something, anything, to hold on to. I closed my eyes, bowed my head, and mumbled the first prayer that came to mind. A childish rhyme I'd learned in Sunday school. It felt pathetic, inadequate, but it was all I had. When I opened my eyes, the music box was still silent. The animatronics were still there, still staring. But something had changed. The air felt heavier, colder, and I could hear something else. A faint scratching sound coming from somewhere inside the building. The scratching sound grew louder, more insistent. It sounded like claws on metal. I tried to ignore it, to focus on the cleaning cycle. The rules were clear. After the music box, or in this case, the interrupted music box, I had to clean. The ball pit was first. I grabbed the cleaning supplies from the janitor's closet. A bucket, a mop, a bottle of suspiciously strong-smelling disinfectant, and a large net. The scratching sound was getting closer, coming from the direction of the arcade. I approached the ball pit with trepidation. It was a large, brightly colored pit filled with hundreds of plastic balls. Normally, it would be swarming with screaming children. Now it was eerily empty, the balls still and silent. The rules were specific: sanitize, count, and rearrange. Exactly 500 balls. I started with the sanitizing, spraying the balls with the disinfectant. The smell was overpowering, making my eyes water. I tried not to think about what might be lurking on those balls, what kind of germs and bodily fluids had accumulated over the years. Then came the counting. This was the part I dreaded the most. It was tedious, time-consuming, and utterly pointless. But the rules were the rules. I started scooping the balls out of the pit with the net, counting them one by one, placing them in a separate, clean container. 1, 2, 3. The scratching sound was getting closer, now accompanied by a low, guttural growl. I tried to speed up, my hands moving faster, my count becoming more frantic. 100, 200, 300. The growling was definitely coming from the arcade. Something was in there. Something big. 400, 450, 499. I reached the bottom of the pit. There were no more balls. 499. One short. Panic seized me. The rules were clear. Exactly 500 balls. Report any discrepancies. But Dale wasn't answering his phone, and the growling was right outside the ball pit now. I looked up and saw it. Standing in the entrance to the arcade, silhouetted against the faint glow of the remaining lights, was a figure. It was tall, bulky, and vaguely humanoid, but its features were distorted, monstrous. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural red light, and it was holding a single, brightly colored plastic ball. The creature stepped out of the shadows, its form becoming clearer. It was one of the animatronics. But it wasn't Chucky, or Helen, or Mr. Munch. It was something else, something that shouldn't be there. Its fur was matted and torn, revealing patches of bare metal and wires. Its eyes were cracked and flickering, emitting that eerie red glow. And its smile was a grotesque parody of a grin, revealing rows of sharp, metallic teeth. It held the ball out towards me, its movements jerky and unnatural. I knew, instinctively, that I couldn't take it. I couldn't break the rules, even if the rules seemed to be leading me to my doom. I need to report this, I stammered, my voice trembling. There's a discrepancy. The creature tilted its head, its neck making a sickening cracking sound. It didn't speak, but I could hear a low, rumbling growl emanating from its chest. I backed away, slowly, towards the arcade. The cleaning cycle. I had to continue the cleaning cycle. Maybe, just maybe, if I followed the rules, I could survive this. I grabbed the mop and bucket from the janitor's closet. The arcade floor was covered in sticky residue, as expected, but this time some of it was black. The industrial strength cleaner. Gloves. I fumbled for the gloves, my hands shaking so badly I could barely put them on. The creature was watching me, its red eyes burning into my soul. It hadn't moved, but I could feel its presence, its malevolent energy radiating towards me. I poured the cleaner onto the floor, the fumes stinging my nostrils. I started mopping, furiously, trying to erase the black stains. The creature took a step closer, its growl growing louder. "Please," I whispered, my voice barely audible. I'm just cleaning, following the rules." The creature didn't respond. It just stood there, watching, waiting. I continued mopping, my movements becoming more desperate, more frantic. I had to clean the floor. I had to finish the cleaning cycle. I had to survive. Suddenly, the creature lunged. I screamed, dropping the mop, scrambling backwards. The creature was fast, incredibly fast for something so large and bulky. It swiped at me with its clawed hand, tearing through my shirt, grazing my skin. I stumbled, falling backwards, hitting my head on the hard tile floor. The world spun, and for a moment, everything went black. I woke up to the sound of grinding metal and a wet, guttural, sloshing sound. My head throbbed, and my vision was blurry. I was lying on the floor of the arcade, surrounded by the sticky residue and the overturned bucket of cleaning solution. The creature was gone, but the sounds were coming from the dining area. I forced myself to sit up, my body screaming in protest. I had to get out of here. I had to escape. I crawled, slowly and painfully, towards the employee entrance. Every movement sent a jolt of pain through my head. I could hear the creature in the dining area, tearing apart the tables and chairs, making those horrific, wet, sloshing sounds. I reached the door, my hand fumbling for the handle. I pulled it open and stumbled out into the cool night air. The Wyoming sky was vast and star-studded, a stark contrast to the claustrophobic horror of the Chuck E. Cheese. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. I was free. I had escaped. But as I looked back at the building, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the faint glow of the remaining lights, was Chuck E. himself. His eyes were fixed on me, his smile wider and more menacing than ever before. He wasn't holding a microphone. He was holding a pizza cutter, a very large, very sharp pizza cutter. He raised the pizza cutter, the metal gleaming in the faint light. It wasn't the playful, cartoonish gesture I'd seen him perform countless times in commercials. This was a threat, pure and simple. My legs, still weak from the fall, finally found their strength. Fueled by pure adrenaline, I turned and ran. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. I just ran, as fast as my battered body would allow, across the empty parking lot, towards the highway. The sound of heavy mechanical footsteps followed me. He was chasing me. Chuck E. Cheese, the mascot of childhood joy, was hunting me down. I reached the edge of the highway, the rumble of a distant truck the only sound besides my own ragged breathing, and the thump, thump, thump of the animatronic's pursuit. I glanced over my shoulder, a fleeting, terrified look. He was closer than I thought. Much closer. His speed was unnatural, terrifying. His eyes, those glassy, dead eyes, were locked on me, filled with a chilling, predatory focus. I scrambled onto the highway, waving my arms frantically at the approaching truck. The headlights blinded me. The horn blared a deafening warning. I braced for impact, expecting to be crushed, to be put out of my misery. But the truck swerved, tires screeching, narrowly missing me. It roared past, leaving me standing in the middle of the highway, shaking, alone. Alone, except for Chuck E. He was standing at the edge of the parking lot, the pizza cutter still raised. He didn't step onto the highway. He just stood there, watching me. I didn't understand. Why hadn't he followed? Why hadn't he finished me off? Then I saw it. A faint, almost imperceptible line, drawn across the asphalt at the very edge of the Chuck E. Cheese property. A boundary. He couldn't cross it. The rules. There had to be a rule about this. Something I'd missed. Something I'd overlooked. I backed away, slowly, keeping my eyes on Chuck E. He didn't move. He just watched. I reached into my pocket, my fingers trembling, and pulled out the crumpled, stained packet of rules. I flipped through the pages, frantically searching, my eyes scanning the text. There it was. At the very end, a small, almost unnoticeable addendum written in a shaky, hurried hand. Addendum B, Containment Protocol. The animatronics are bound to the property. They cannot cross the boundary line, marked by a thin strip of red paint at the edge of the parking lot. If you find yourself outside the boundary line, do not return. The animatronics will perceive this as a challenge, and the containment protocol will be nullified. Seek immediate shelter. Contact Dale. If he answers. Red paint. I hadn't even noticed it. I'd been so focused on escaping, on surviving, that I'd missed the most crucial detail. I looked back at Chuck E. He was still there, still watching, but his posture had changed. He was no longer menacing, no longer predatory. He was defeated. He lowered the pizza cutter, his mechanical arm making a slow, grinding sound. He turned and walked back towards the building, his footsteps echoing in the night. I was safe, for now. But I knew I couldn't stay here. I had to get away, as far away as possible. I had to find somewhere safe, somewhere to hide. I started walking, my legs aching, my head throbbing, my body covered in bruises and scrapes. I walked along the desolate highway, under the vast, uncaring Wyoming sky, not knowing where I was going, not knowing what I would do. I knew one thing, though. I would never look at a Chuck E. Cheese the same way again, and I would never, ever work another night shift. I kept walking for a very long time. Hours. My throat was parched, and any sound made me jump. Eventually, the sun had begun to rise, and I found a rest stop up ahead. I didn't dare go inside, so I circled around the back. I figured that they must have a water spigot, and maybe a hose that I could drink from. As luck would have it, there was a hose. I cupped my hands and began to gulp down large mouthfuls of water. It wasn't the best tasting water, but after that night of terror, it was like drinking from a pristine mountain spring. As the sun rose, I had a clearer view of the highway. It was much busier now. Cars, RVs, and massive trucks were barreling down at dangerous speeds. I knew that I needed to get to safety, and I probably should not be wandering on the side of the road. I dialed Dale. He picked up after a few rings. "Hello?" "Dale, it's me, Alex, last night." "That thing ... Oh, you survived then?" "Good. Met our old pal Chuck, eh?" "Happens sometimes. Usually if the place gets a bit messy, or someone misses a step with the music box. Gets him riled up." He spoke with an alarming casualness, as if discussing the weather. "Riled up? He tried to kill me. And what was that other thing in the arcade?" "Oh, that's just one of the older models. We keep him locked up usually. Must have gotten loose. Happens sometimes. Don't worry about it." "Don't worry about it?" Dale, I'd almost died. "Look, kid, you signed the waiver. You read the rules. You knew the risks." "The risks? You said it was just a cleaning job." "It is a cleaning job. With perks. Look, you're off the property now, right? You're safe. Just don't come back. Consider yourself terminated. And try not to talk about this to anyone, okay? We wouldn't want to upset the children." He hung up. I stared at my phone, dumbfounded. Terminated? After everything I'd been through? I was stranded, jobless, traumatized, and covered in dirt and grime. And the worst part was, I knew I couldn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? They'd think I was crazy. I started walking again, not knowing where I was going, just putting one foot in front of the other. The highway stretched out before me, endless and unforgiving. I saw a police car. I thought about trying to get his attention, but knew that Dale was right. No one would believe me. They'd think I was crazy. As I walked, a new chilling thought crept into my mind. The rules, the addendums, they were so specific, so detailed. How many people had worked that night shift before me? How many had encountered the animatronics? How many hadn't been so lucky? And the most terrifying question of all, were those rules written in ink or in something else? I looked over my shoulder, half expecting to see Chuck E. standing there, pizza cutter in hand. But there was nothing. Just the empty highway, stretching back to the horizon. But I knew, deep down, that he was still out there. Waiting. Watching. And that somewhere, in some other Chuck E. Cheese, on some other desolate highway, another unsuspecting employee was reading those same rules, preparing for their first night shift. I started walking again, this time with a renewed sense of purpose. I was no longer going to be a victim. I decided that I would be a hunter. These nightmarish creatures needed to be stopped, and I seemed to be fated to do it. The sun beat down and the road shimmered,